So, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see me. A very warm welcome to the RABDF Business and Policy Conference webinar. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. It's really great to see so many of you taking time to register and join us this morning. My name is Robert Craig. I'm a dairy farmer in the north of England, farming across 3 units in Cumbria and Northumberland, but I'm also Vice Chairman of RABDF. Now, for the second year, we've made the decision to run this conference virtually rather than physically meeting up, and of course we would much rather meet you face to face and in person, and we're all hoping that from next year we can revert back to normality and we can meet you all again in 2022. On the plus side, of course, we can run this policy conference virtually, and this allows us to spread the content over the next 3 days, enabling short bite-sized sessions of around an hour in length, and we can facilitate this to you. So today, the first webinar, we've got the effects of future policy on the dairy sector. Tomorrow, we've got protecting our product, how welfare and labelling go hand in hand. And on Thursday, we've got the environmental challenges facing the sector and the development of further legislation. All of the sessions start at 10:30, and the Zoom links will have been sent through to you when you registered from the RABDF team. I just need to thank the sponsors at this point, so Barclays and 4Farmers for sponsoring the conference, without which their support, it wouldn't be possible to put this on this week. And thanks must also go to our speakers for giving up their time and participating in all of the sessions. But sent us a short message that we're going to listen to presently, after which I'll give an opportunity for all of the panel to introduce themselves in more detail. So Romany, if you could play Victoria Prentice's short video clip now. So yes, starting with Sarah, because you're top of my list, if you can give me an introduction to yourself, your work, and what you see really as the main challenges and opportunities in terms of policy as we look forward to the future.
Thanks, Robert. So I'm Sarah Tomlinson. I've been a farm vet in Derbyshire for 20 years. I'm also on the British Cattle Veterinary Association board, and I sit on the Bovine TB Partnership, which is a government stakeholder group feeding into policy around TB. And my day job, I'm technical director of the TB advisory service. So for me, obviously, one of the key policy areas is TB and how we manage that going forward. We've had some announcements on changes to do with that, because to me, TB underpins a lot of animal welfare issues on farm, farmer mental health, veterinary mental health as well. So if we can get TB eradication targeted for 2038, that will help just farming future in general, I think. Veterinary practices have got the same issues farmers have, in that we are struggling with recruitment and retention, the cost of living in rural areas, cost of housing, loss of rural amenities, things like that. You know, we've got exactly the same issues that farmers get. We can't get vets to come and join our practices, which is a shame, because actually as a farm vet, I love being part of that rural community. Once we get vets, we tend to try and keep them, but again, things like TB testing, going on to 6-monthly testing into the high risk area, you know, we don't go into the job to do things like TB testing. We want to improve health and productivity on farms.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And we'll move on to Mike King, please, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Robert. Yes, I'm Mike King. We farm down in South Gloucestershire, just north of Bristol and Bath. Currently milking 700 cows on a high input, high output system. We do graze, and we supply milk to one of the leading retailers, with quite stringent scheme conditions, get the words out. We get in and around the use of antibiotics, animal health and welfare, and particularly on the horizon now is environmental and regen ag. So really my key areas for government is in and around those two areas, but also about free trade. Brexit was the idea that we were going to have free trade, and We all read in the press that there's not equalisation, but standards across the whole of the EU, and I'm concerned that we may have a market which is going to be very difficult to fulfil when our government policy pushing us in a different direction.
Great, thank you, Mike. We'll move on to David Christensen.
Thank you, Robert. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to speak this morning. I'm David Christensen. I'm a tenant dairy farmer from Oxfordshire. We run 2 units, a spring calving herd of 350 cows and an autumn calving herd of 600 cows. And then we have about another 1,000 head of cattle on top of that, heifers and beef cattle. I think the big key challenge for me is the whole environmental challenge. And I mean that at both a micro level on farm, but also at a macro level in persuading consumers, and particularly the next generation of consumers, that dairy is good and it's up to us to make dairy guilt-free for them, so they continue to consume and benefit from that. When I talk about it at a micro level, I'm thinking about farming rules for water, NVZs, and the whole implementation of that. I'm thinking about the lack of science that's involved, particularly with regards to spreading periods. We've got the most open autumn I think I can probably ever remember. Grass is still growing, and yet we're closed from spreading. We were promised more science in our decision making, in our policy making post-Brexit, and we don't appear to be getting it. So there's a micro request for government. And at a macro level, the whole bit about recognising how good we are in Western Europe in terms of our carbon footprint. We should be one of the world's global breadbaskets. We have everything going for us. Most of all, we have a stable climate, and we start from a very stable position which is a great place to start with if you're going to deal with more extremes. So we should be maximising production in the UK and Northwest Europe. That clearly is not an excuse for not looking after the environment and biodiversity. We have to do it all, but we should be maximising production because this is such a great place to produce food. And at some point, that penny will drop, but I don't think it has yet, and something needs to make it. So that's my opening gambit. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, David. And moving on, lastly, but certainly not least, we've got Karen just down the road from me anyway, in Cheshire.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you, Robert. Morning, everybody. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this morning. I'm a dairy farmer from Cheshire. I farm with my husband, Tom. We milk 530 crossbred cows on an all year round calving system, milking 3 times a day, and we produce about 11,500 litres a year. We sell our milk to a broker, which then allows us to be in a position to also sell some milk to a cheesemaker. We also sell some milk for barista milk, and we have a doorstep delivery round with about just short of 600 customers, and also then some on-farm vending machines. So we do lots of different things, lots of contact with the public. We're very high on animal welfare, which is something that we feel taking our industry forward is really, really key to us being successful. For me, like everybody else here, I think, and what everybody's talking about, it is environment. It is key to us going forward. One of the things that I would be most concerned about is with the staffing area at the moment, like Sarah with the vets. It's affording us, one, to have the money to meet those changes and requirements from policy, to take us forward, to make those changes, and also to have the manpower and the people on board to do that, and to encourage the younger people in to the industry to want to take that on and do it. And I think government has really got to be behind that and support us as an industry producing local food that is high welfare, actually on our own island, with very, very low carbon footprint. And also we need to kind of get rid of this false information that is peddled, and I think government need to stand behind that as well. So that would be me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Just by means of reminding anyone that's joined us since the beginning, it's really straightforward to ask a question. If you just click on the Q&A sort of speech bubble at the bottom of the screen. And type in your question. Please do put your name and your role within the industry on there, so we know who we've got, and then the questions will find their way back through to me. The short video clip that we all missed there from Victoria Prentice, I mean, she basically covered 3 areas. A little bit about dairy contracts. Obviously, contracts are likely or highly likely to become mandatory well, the legislation will be passed probably early. She referred to early 2022 to early next year, but the likelihood is that none of this mandatory legislation will kick in until about 24 months later, because of the time to sort of transition for the industry to transition. We don't know specifically yet the detail of that, and she didn't give us any detail actually in her talk. She also alluded to George Eustace giving us more detail in the sustainable farming incentive in the coming weeks. I think it was the term that she used. So we wait with interest to see exactly, you know, the details that are going to come out through that. And lastly, she mentioned the Farming Investment Fund that most of us are probably aware of. This is split into 2 funds. There's the Farming Equipment and Technology Fund that's open now and closes in the early January, so 7th of January. Applications have got to be in for that. And then the Farming Transformation Fund, which is around water management. The eligibility criteria has to be ascertained by, I think, the 12th of January, with applications in by the end of June, so a longer window there. And that's pretty much what she covered in the short presentation that she gave us there. So specifically, I want to sort of drive the discussion around policy, really, and what we want from government. If we were government, what could we do? We sort of have an idea of the direction of travel so far as support goes, in terms of public goods and the environment. And I suppose, how important is this for dairy farming? Is this going to drive a change in the environment, or are government almost behind, if you like, what our processors and consumers are wanting? I feel as if they possibly are. I mean, I think it's very important that government and industry needs to be aligned on this, but it seems to me as if the processors, the consumers, the retailers are driving this at a much faster pace than government at the moment. David, I don't know whether you want to kick us off with that.
Yeah, there's a disconnect, I think, in the way it's operating. Certainly, you know, if I put my Arla hat on for a minute, then we have a number of brands, and we are absolutely key to us is protecting those brands and ensuring, as I said earlier, that the next generation wants to go on buying them. So we are pushing hard down the environmental route in terms of our Arla Garden programme and biodiversity protection and stuff like that. We just set up a pilot scheme of regenerative farms. I think a lot of us don't really understand what regenerative means, if I'm completely honest. I certainly don't. So I welcome that. So certainly there's a demonstration that the processor is moving. I think government are getting it wrong. I think there's clumsy implementation of policy, and that lack of science really concerns me. We should be doing it much smarter than we are. So the key requests for me are, let's use science to guide us rather than arbitrary dates. And in terms of implementation, and I'm specifically looking at the farming rules for water here, I think that was passed about 3 years ago, but none of us really knew about it. And so suddenly we get a launch this July to implement immediately. Well, that's no way to implement policy. So smarter policy introduction, longer lead times, more publicity, so we can get ourselves organised for it. Those are the sort of things specifically that I would like government to improve.
Great, thank you, David. I'll go on to Mike, because I know, Mike, you've had an aligned contract for quite a long time, and it seems as if the retailers have been driving an agenda, certainly environmental agenda.
Yeah, I think you're right, Robert. I think some of the contracts that some of the retailers, and particularly like Arla, they're out there, they're ahead of government. They're more joined up with government as well. I'm concerned, especially around environmental, is some of the mixed messaging. So there's a perceived drive towards minimum till, then on the other hand, we need to incorporate slurry within a very short space of time. So some of the messaging is very, very mixed. I'm not sure that a lot of it's led by the science at all. So some of the retailer we work with is very much look towards is actually the science, and most of what we're looking at is science-based, science-led, and best practice. And for David's benefit, Regen Ag, as we've been told, is beetles. So it's basically, well, that's being very simplistic, obviously. But you know, we're looking at targeted use of arthemetics, you know, and actually following what we've done with antibiotics over the years with the arthemetics, and actually rather than blanket treatment and everything, just be testing, looking at you know, the requirement for them, and then obviously the benefit that has, follow-on benefit that has to you know, the dung beetles and that in the soils is shown to be very beneficial. And it's again, where it comes back to the science, is that the science shows that actually the more bugs and the more soil beetles you've got into your soil, the more your fertility is better, the more your drainage is better, the more nitrogen your soils can retain, the more carbon those soils can retain. So it's just smart. It is a bit smarter way. And if I'm really honest, it worries me that government just have not even begin to understand half of these things, to be honest. And they're being, you know, there's a lot of push from, you know, maybe NGOs and other broader interest groups that are more pushing government agenda by sound bites rather than science. So yeah, that's where I would be really concerned at this point in time.
Great, thank you, Michael. I'm going to go to Karen next, and then Sarah to get a vet's perspective on this. Yep, just unmute.
Sorry, I would ask the question, do government really know what we're doing and the amount of effort that we are putting in? Sometimes I think we are so ahead on the game on so many things compared to some countries in Europe where they're wanting to bring food in from, that are they really, one, are they bothered about what we do? Does it come down to money and it's better for them if we're importing stuff? Are they actually really, really behind our industry? I don't know. I'd put that to the panel and I'd be interested to know what you think.
I think that's a really good point. What I'd like to do is bring Sarah in really and get a vet's perspective on this, because we seem to have focused as an industry. I mean, the pace of change is immense at the moment. We're on this this journey towards regen ag, or whatever it is, net zero carbon, or whatever it is. But certainly speaking to our local vets and vets, you know, quite high profile vets that I come across, there's a frustration that we're almost ignoring the sort of productivity side of it and the animal health side of it, and that what we could gain so much more by, you know, moving towards elite health status and things like that. I mean, that's almost got lost in the environmental argument at the moment.
Absolutely. And I think vets are crucial to all of this. You know, we're in a really unique position that we do quite often. We understand the animal health and welfare and disease issues on farm. We're also often party to financial conversations. You know, we understand the management, the aims and objectives of farms. So we should be part of this journey that everyone's going on. Mike mentioned the use of anthelmintics and the way that can planning on farm, you know, that can come from your vet. Pasture management to reduce the use of anthelmintics is something that we've been doing in the sheep world for quite a long time, and actually we need to move that now into the dairy industry. For me, the biggest environmental sustainable gains are getting on top of endemic disease. That will improve productivity, increase efficiencies on farm, getting the majority, you know, bigger product for the fewer animals. That's got you know, feeds into the clean air strategy, into all the carbon footprinting, the methane production, and we are key to that alongside the farm teams. Going back to what Karen said about, do the government have any idea of what we are doing? A classic example of that, I think, is BVD control, Yoni's control. There's a lot of membership into schemes. A lot of farms know that they are BVD free, or they are near to achieving that. And yet actually, you know, some of the things I've been party to actually are trying to start at the beginning again, whereas actually we need to recognise that a lot of farms have achieved a lot of great things, and they need to be rewarded for that, not just the farmers sort of at the beginning of this journey. So I agree with Karen, you know, we need to shout more about what we have achieved and what we are doing, and make policy appropriate to different stages of that journey.
Look, I think that's really important, but you know, whose responsibility, where does the responsibility lie, if you like? You know, we can say government, where can government fit in? Where can the, you know, how can they drive how can policy drive this? Because we're often guilty of not shouting and telling our own story. We've gotten into a situation now where we're allowing the opposite side of what we do to tell our story for us in the way that they see fit. But it feels as an industry as if we're not vocal enough. But I often wonder whose responsibility that is, and we think government can do something. Well, back to Karen's point, do they even know what we are doing when we see the outcome of the trade deals that we've struck already? Mike, I don't know whether you want to come in. You've dealt with government now for quite a lot of years as RABDF chairman, and you're still involved, and it gets frustrating after a while. Where can government fit into this?
You can tell by my previous answers that my frustrations with government go long and deep, and this current administration is far more challenging, although I'm not at the front of it at them anymore. It's far more challenging than we have ever been used to. As farmers particularly, you really got to look at the issues around delays in slaughter of pigs and the answers you get from government to see their complete disconnect with actually what goes on in agriculture. How do we address this? Obviously, the farming unions are working hard. I do believe, though, that government need to want to understand it, not just for us to sit there and talk to them about it. And it has been suggested over many years, and they did take it up on certain areas, and we've done that around EID, where they've had focus groups of dairy farmers or in livestock people who have actually come in and actually told them what it's like, what the cold face, and actually getting them out on farm. And I mean, it was quite telling that, I'm not sure whether you had them, Robert, but I know we had the ID people. I know Di did as well. They came round to farm, and it was quite worrying that not one single member of the team that was doing the new electronic work for identifying cattle, not one of them have ever been onto a farm in their lives. And yet these guys are making policy. And that's not an isolated incident by any stretch of the imagination. And perhaps we're being a little ambitious if we think that they are going to be from any sort of agricultural background. Is highly unlikely. But there is a big challenge there to make sure that these people that are in these positions, one, that they're there for a length of time that gets them to across the subject, and two, the fact that we and the industry, wider industry, pervade what we're doing on farm. I mean, like Karen said, I mean, they haven't got a clue. They honestly haven't got a clue what goes on farm. I've had George Eustace at the farm, and I won't go into detail, but I mean, some of the things that he came out with, it was, he's 30 years behind the times. I think until we actually put our message across as strong as the sound bites that come from the pressure organisations, I think that's going to be a big challenge. But I mean, how we actually get that connection, so for the government to realise that actually, there's a benefit to them in actually making correct policy with the information from people at ground level, which benefits the whole of the industry. And it's quite apparent that if we get grant schemes and other schemes along that are going to help the environment and slurry, that those are targeted in the right areas. Pre-COVID, I was fortunate enough to be on one of those groups where we advised them, but the minute the COVID obviously came along, that all stopped, and it seems to have gone off on a different tangent since then. So that does concern me, what we're going to see next year when the schemes for slurry and manure disposal come out, that it may not be quite as we envisage it would be.
Thank you, Mike. Just as a reminder to anyone that wants to pop a question in, just click on the Q&A box and we can put the questions through. David, I'm sure you share quite a lot of Mike's frustrations there, having been involved in, at the top end of the industry for quite a long time. Are we over reliant on government? Do we think they're going to solve all our problems, and we sort of rest on our laurels a little bit as an industry, and maybe we should be better organised?
I certainly think the responsibility lies with us in making sure we get those messages across. Frankly, it's boring work because you keep having to do it. Civil servants move on every 6, 12, 18 months. So you just have to keep banging away. And we've done it through the policy advisory group at Arla, and it's the time and the money in to do it. And there's no way around that. I think as an industry, we are frankly abjectly failing to land our messages. And I think we've got to get much more organized about this. I think we have a really good, sometimes think we are the best in the world. We're not. There are some other really good producers out there, but we're certainly up there, and we shouldn't be afraid to get that message across. But I don't think we're doing it well enough. And I don't think the mechanisms we're currently using are anything like man enough, frankly, to get it across. And the only way I think we can do it, and I'm no expert, clearly I'm a farmer, not a marketeer, but I think we've got to put our hands in our pockets and get somebody really professional to help us reposition the industry. And I think that will be beneficial from both the consumer level and sales, but also to the points we've made about working in this. So I think that responsibility is very much up to us. I think we've got a real problem with government. Successive governments, regardless of colour, want to run a cheap food policy in the UK. So let's not rely on them, because they're not there to help us. It's up to us to help ourselves here. And thus, I mean, clearly the route I've gone down is the cooperative route to try and leave us some advantage there. But I think on every front, we've got to be helping ourselves, because frankly, I don't think we're going to get a lot of help from them.
I think that's really an interesting point. Hopefully you're still getting David. I think you were having a bit of a connection problem there. Sarah, I know you want to come back to David's point.
Yeah, it was kind of what David and Mike have said. You feel sometimes you are repeating things to government, and I think it's because things are seen in isolation. So you might have one conversation with one group of civil servants that are feeding into, say, slurry and manure management, and actually then you have to have the same conversation within that health and welfare and disease or TB policy department. So we need to make sure all policies aren't detrimental to other areas. So for example, the water regulations that have come in were kind of looked at in isolation, but maybe didn't think about how farming fed into those. Slurry and manure is close to my heart because of how that affects endemic disease. You know, we need to manage grazing after we've put on slurry and manure in order to minimize the transmission of things like Yonis and TB. So we can't just think about it in isolation from an environmental management point of view, but actually how it affects animal health and welfare. And I think, and again, talking about rural issues, looking at rural broadband, the cost of housing, rural services, NHS services and things like that, it all becomes part of this one health kind of policy that actually farmer and human animal health, and then animal health and welfare and the public health and welfare all are interlinked, and farmers are kind of the common theme in all of this. It's in our power, you know, we are managing the land, and actually the government need to bring us along in all of these policies.
And might if we were better at explaining to consumers, explaining to anybody really what the benefits of the industry, the good that we're doing. It's interesting to hear your comments around recruitment and retention of vets. I mean, I've spoken with Karen on a panel once around recruitment of staff, and I mean it's a major concern in the industry, and it's something, you know, that we're failing at doing. I just want to move the conversation on a little bit towards trade, really, and obviously we've had, you know, a few announcements in government, most latterly around New Zealand and you know, free trade with New Zealand, but specifically a couple of really interesting reports published by Kite in the last week or so, NMR sponsored report into the opportunities for export for the UK dairy industry. And very much based around the future of what Europe are going to do, the agricultural policy for Europe, and the likelihood that we're going to see a fairly sizable reduction in the amount of production that Europe is going to be, a dairy product that they're going to be producing in the future, and basically what that means for the rest of the world. David, I don't know whether you share, I expect you've read those reports, whether you share the sort of optimism that's out there. I mean, basically global demand for dairy is likely to increase at a similar rate to what it's been increasing at, but you know, environmental constraints, and we're not immune from that, but certainly the way Europe has set its stall out, there's going to be, they're thinking 6% less milk produced across Europe, and you've got other major exporting countries, like New Zealand, the US, all probably coming under similar constraints. Do you agree with the outlook for the really optimistic outlook for dairy going forward?
I certainly think there's a very strong message coming through there, and that I'm going to turn my camera off because I think I'm unstable. So okay. Let me try that. Can you hear me still, Robert?
Yes, yeah, clear.
Yeah. So I think there's a very strong message about global demand. The bit that concerns me is the political will to allow us to access that market. And that's the bit. I think, as I said before, we've got everything going for us. There was a really interesting paper by the World Resource Institute last year, which basically said, and it was a Danish paper, but basically it said we should be optimizing production in Denmark because it's one of the lowest carbon footprint countries in the world in producing dairy, and that would apply in the UK as well. So we really should be pushing it on. My concern is we're not going to get there if government don't support us in that opportunity. Now, in terms of, so let's park government for a moment then. It comes then down to the processor and processor appetite to reach those markets. Again, with my Arla hat on, I'm delighted that we're building a second enormous powder tower in central Germany to pull milk out of Central Europe and get it into those developing markets. But I want something equivalent in the UK. I don't know whether it's powder, whether it's some other product, but I want more stainless steel devoted to a growing export market, and somebody has got to invest in that. I suspect we are, well, I know we are looking at it with an Arla hat on, but it would be good if other processors were looking at it as well. But I think it's a really exciting opportunity, but we need to be able to access it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, there may be a great opportunity out there for future trade, but actually we've got to process the milk that we can produce to get it to be tradable, haven't we? And we've got to invest in that as an industry, and that's the big challenge as I see it. Mike, I don't know whether you want to comment on that. I know you're aligned to a UK retailer, but if we can short the home market, then potentially we can, we all benefit from that.
Yeah, definitely, Robert. Definitely. I still think there's a good future. I mean, you only got to look at some of the RABDF's work around the production of milk and how efficient we are as a country, particularly. And the messages is strong. I think the market is obviously these reports have come out are saying that production will drop in Europe, and I think that will. I mean, there's been more changes since that last report was put out. I mean, I also expect most of you are aware that Germany have just elected a new government, and no surprise that the head of agriculture is a vegan, and she's already stated that she wants to cut dairy and livestock production by 20% in this next government term. So no surprises that they've got some challenges coming their way from just within their own countries. So it's definitely an opportunity for us. But I do agree with David. I am concerned about accessing these markets, particularly with one, the lack of processing capacity in the UK, and two, that equalisation of rules across the whole of the EU along with us in the UK.
No, really good point. So actually, even if we were on the brink of building a new site, say for a powder butter or cheese site in the UK, I don't think it could be assumed anymore that you get permission to do that, because a big dairy processing plant producing 50,000 tons of cheese would be akin to opening a new coal mine in a lot of people's minds. So, we've definitely got to get the message across there. There's a really interesting question coming there that often, I often think about this, and it's around policy again. It's around cheap food, and obviously the government are linked into cheap food, and I don't think we've got the message across yet to government that food needs to be valued in a different way certainly to what it's been valued through most of our lifetimes. And it basically is cheap food really compatible with long-term food production. So long-term is basically our side of the gate at odds with the other side of the gate. If you've got retailers, if you've got consumers expecting cheap food, can we produce that long-term sustainable? So Karen, I'll throw that one at you, because
not on a welfare basis, we can't. No, we can't keep producing cheap food and producing it at the standards that we're being asked, or that we should, you know, the standards, and especially on welfare, we should have really, really high welfare. But if we can't get paid for that product accordingly, then how are we going to keep that up? And also, you know, just by running in general, you know, single farm payments going to be going. But there's so many other things now to come in to deal with the environment. We all want to look after the environment as farmers. We all want to save it for the next 100 years and generations to come. And whoever takes over from us, we want it to be in a better place when they take it, whether it's our son or whatever we choose to do with this business. But if we keep trying to produce this food to the supermarkets or government telling us that we have to because they want to keep inflation down, then at some point something's going to break. And whether that's we lose some really good farmers, or just basically we then, unfortunately, the other people on the other side of the fence will win then, because they'll start to catch us out because we can't keep up. And then that's, you know, that's hard for farmers who want to look after the environment and their animals. That causes the massive old stress factor. And then, you know, we go down that road then. So then that's a whole nother ball game, which costs a lot of money and is very unproductive for farmers. Just going back to the German problem, I think we've got a little problem as well with the MVZ. I've seen a few tweets this week about somebody who does a lot of advising on MVZs who is supporting veganism. So that's a massive conflict of interest for me, to have somebody in that arena with that kind of power to be talking about and advising us on how to run MVZs and look after the land when they're speaking at vegan conferences. That's, you know, in support of veganism. Yeah, that's a real worry.
I think I saw that. That was someone in fairly prominent position in the Environment Agency, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Sarah, I just want to bring you in on this really. Would you have the same concerns over sort of health and welfare? I mean, obviously we've had this pursuit of cheap food for at least 40, 50 years, as far back as I can remember in any case. And, you know, the outcome of that, what does it mean actually at the farm level? And I suppose the question is that long-term sustainable, or have we sort of hit the buffers?
I mean, Karen's right, you know, high achieving animal health and welfare, which is exactly, you know, it shouldn't be something to aspire to. It should be the baseline, cost money, with veterinary input, with experienced, skilled staff. You know, key to getting calf health management, Karen speaks about this, is having the staff that are trained to do it. And they cost money. You know, anybody can pay anybody to do a job, but it's that education and that experience that goes with it that actually is human input that can improve animal health and welfare. And we've been repeatedly told that the rest of the world really value that, and they value our British brand. But I don't want to export that. You know, as a mum, I want to be able to afford British food for my children. I don't want imported food that is maybe not as high welfare standards as ours. So I think, again, policy needs to, when we're talking about trade, we don't want to export our high welfare and then increase our carbon footprint of imported products too. So I think we do need to be careful that we don't push higher and higher standards on our farmers with the stress levels and anxiety and putting people out of business that goes along with, just so we can export that. You know, we need to be able to keep it in this country, and government policy, you know, should be able to manage that and do that.
Yeah, really good points. There's a question there around agriculture being perceived as being the issue in terms of climate, rather than the solution, if you like. And basically, I suppose there's a broader question there as to how we communicate that. You know, we've done various co-funded advertising campaigns with HDB and the dairy processors through Dairy UK. I mean, that's sort of come to an end at the moment. I mean, as a panel, do you feel we should be doing more of that? Because we've got a great message to get out there as basically forage producers, that we can sequester carbon, we can be part of the solution. We're certainly, you know, towards the top end of efficient dairy producers globally. So, you know, if we all believe global consumption of dairy is going to keep on rising, you know, why shouldn't it be such as the UK forage-based systems that produce that? So basically, the question is, how do we support the promotion of that as an industry? Is this something, in terms of money, we need to be putting money into this. Is it processor money? Is it HDB, which would mean the levy would have to go up considerably? David, I think you've probably got some fairly strong views on how we do that, and how we get the message across.
Yeah, I could go back to what I said before, Robert. It's down to us to do it, and frankly, we just got to put our hands in our pockets. It should be a joint initiative between the processors and us, without any shadow of a doubt, because it will benefit both parties. But we just got to get much better at landing our punches than we are at the moment. And for me, it means we've got to get professionals involved, and I mean heavyweight marketing professionals that know how to reposition the whole industry. It's at that level we've got to do it. I don't think I want to say any more about that because I've said it, but I want to come back to something Sarah said, because it does tie in. And I'm very happy, Sarah, for dairy stuffs to stay in the UK, but only if it's at a fair price. And my point about the export market, it is about the leverage that might give us in terms of pricing. And so let's deal with the pricing issue whilst we're at it. I think with the current inflation we're facing, that's severe enough. But actually the challenge has been the long-term lack of inflation in our milk price to deal with the costs. And then you've got all the environmental measures coming on us at the moment. So I think the message that we should be getting out there now is that our milk price should be starting with a 4, not a 3. Okay, I've been thinking this privately for a while, but I've not been saying it publicly. But I think we've just got to see a sea change, frankly, in the milk price. I don't think in terms of the cost to the consumer that adds a huge amount. For retailers, it's a margin operation, so it makes no difference to them. In actual fact, if it's a percentage margin, it will benefit them. But that sort of step up would make a key difference at farm level, Sarah, to your initiatives about animal welfare, and then to all the stuff we're talking about, coping with the environment, about promoting our product, etc. So that's what we need to be delivering. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. And Mike, I don't know whether you want to make a comment on the specifics around promoting what we do as an industry and how we fund it. We're going to get a vote more than likely in the spring as to the sort of strategic direction of HDB, but in terms of how we gather funds together as an industry to pay for this.
Yeah, I agree with a lot David said, actually. I think we've got to put our hands in our pockets as an industry. If we do want to move that message forward, and it comes back to the point you said about, the milk prices start with a 4. Most of the attendees would be looking and horror at us saying that we've got to put our hands in their pockets when there isn't anything left in their pocket to drag out to actually fund any of this. So, I mean, it's sort of a bit of a fulfilling prophecy if we don't get the milk price so that some of these things can be done. Also, I do think that our HDB have a role to play personally, and that would be the feedback that comes from our dairy discussion group with a group of larger producers, that they would be saying that there's a levy payment there. I would argue that levy payment probably needs to be higher, without a doubt, and that they should be focusing on some of these areas and demonstrating. It's good if we can get marketeers putting the message out there, but if there's some science and some work done in the background by the likes of HDB, I think that's a win-win for the industry point of view, really. And that's work that can be, stand up to scrutiny.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because it's sometimes not a very favourable thing to suggest that we all pay a higher levy. But if we could ring fence that and push it towards promotion of the industry. Karen, what would your views be on the sort of promotion of what we do?
I'd be 100%. I think it lies a lot with us as well at the farm gate, for those of us who can promote and deal directly with the public and do some on-farm tours, because it's really important that we bring those younger generations through and we actually have them on farm. So we do quite a lot of that. We have the clubs, the scouts, schools, and the teachers, and everybody really love it as well. You get them on farm, showing them what we do. They ask questions, and years ago they'd probably come and ask questions like, do our cows graze? Now they do ask us things like, do we use a dribble bar? Which, for me, do we use fertilizer? That they are getting more clued up anyway. So we need to be ahead of that all the time. And so we're giving them the right information, and we're doing the right thing by them. But for years, Tom and I have always said, if we just upped the levy, or every farmer in the country or dairy farmer just gave, I don't know, £500 over a year, that would go a long, long way. Obviously, as we're coming out of the industry, that we're losing people out of the industry, that's going to get less and less. But if we could really do something like that, but it goes to, as David said, a professional agency, and one that is placed to reposition businesses and companies to get us where we need to be. Veganism got ahead and shouted very loud because of the money they've got behind them. We just don't have that kind of money. But if we use the right kind of people and we all chip in, there's no reason why we can't shout a bit louder. And once we get the momentum and get that ball rolling, it's really easy to keep it rolling into our advantage. But we've all got to be on board with it. We all can't moan about AHDB and say, oh, I shouldn't pay a levy. So long as it's getting used right, and there is a lot of good things and information there that we can go and access, so long as we make sure that it is used in the right way or directed in the right way, then no, I'm all for it. But it's up to us, unfortunately. We can't rely on government because they don't really know what we do, and they're not all really behind us.
Thank you, Karen. I think the school point is really well made. We have school children around one of the farms we have over in Northumberland. So these are inner city children out of inner city Newcastle, and actually it has a bigger impact, if you like, a more evident impact on the parents and teachers that come with them. So we have a busload of children with probably about 8, 10, 12 adults with them, many of which have never been on a farm in their lives, and you can just see the learning experience. It's absolutely amazing, you know, and they have these preconceived ideas of what they're going to expect to see, and it's so far different from the reality. And it's a great thing. I mean, I would absolutely recommend anyone to get involved in this and do it, because it's a really effective way of promoting what we do. Look, in the interest of time, we've probably got another few minutes left. I'd just like to go round the panel really, and I'm going to give you the agriculture brief. You know, assume you're Victoria Prentice or George Eustace, and you know, what would you do? What one or two things would you do new into the job, you know, to fulfil your ambitions for the dairy sector, really? Because this is about government policy. What can they do? Because I know it's a bit of a blunt sword sometimes what government can do, but and I'm going to go to David first.
So I think two key things for me. One is integrate science into policy making and work with us on the policy making. I have to say, I think they're working much better on this change than they have done historically, in fairness. And I've been involved in the slurry design stuff at the moment, and some of the other stuff, and there's a definite willingness and making it happen, working with us. So I appreciate that, but more of that, please. And then I think the recognition of where we sit globally and making sure that those trade deals genuinely protect us rather than selling us out. That's the key bit. I understand the drive for cheap food. It allows the rest of the economy to grow. But if we are serious about our environmental credentials and about making a difference to the environment, then we need to make sure that there's a sensible border tax with regard to environmental standards. And that's what they should implement. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be cheap. But if we are serious, that's what you have to do. Otherwise, all we do is export food production with a low standard from here. And frankly, that is stupid. Thank you.
So, really good points, very well made. It'd be interesting to see how the recommendations from Henry Dimbleby's future food report, actually, how much of that ends up in the government white paper. I'm going to go to Karen next, and then Mike, and we'll finish with Sarah.
Mine's something just really, I would ask them to do their homework, learn about the value of our industry and what we actually produce as an industry. So we produce something which is a food, and it's the only food that you can actually live off without anything else and not die. So that's so important, the health benefits of what we produce. We don't make expensive, fashionable handbags. We produce a nutritious product that people need to survive. And without it, there's going to be more problems with children's teeth, with not having the calcium, the vitamins, the enzymes. You know, there's all this stuff that we have from milk. And I would just ask them to just connect and engage a little bit more or a lot more with us as farmers on our industry and with the public to find out what they really want. And I think you'll find out they want milk.
You're absolutely right. I mean, probably the most valuable public good that we produce is the food and the nutrition that we supply. So, Mike?
First thing I'd recognise if I was going to the government is that the end of the era of cheap food needs to come to an end. You know, for all the reasons we spoke about this morning, whether that's environmental, training, you know, getting people into the industry, because you know farmers need to be able to compete with other industries from on a salary basis to be able to make sure that they retain workers. I would also be quite keen that they actually, as a result, people actually valued food. You know, we've got the second cheapest food in the world, so only second to America, and we can see that the problems that brings to people's health from the lack of valuing of food. It was quite telling when I did my study tour many years ago to the Far East that everybody felt that if cheap food was on offer, nobody buy it. They buy the most expensive thing that their purse would allow them to pay, because they were putting it, that was value to them. They were eating it. It was a value nutritious product. And why would you want to buy something that was cheaper? They just couldn't fathom our fascination with cheap food. And I think that, you know, that probably is at the root of quite a number of our challenges that we face as an industry at the moment.
And notwithstanding the immense amount of waste that is generated from a food system that doesn't value itself. And Sarah, from arguably the most important professionals that we all have in our businesses, from a veterinary perspective.
So it comes down to endemic disease eradication, promoting that, because that has the productivity gains, the profitability gains, and the environmental gains. And coming back to TB, I would use all the tools we have in the toolbox to eradicate it. One tool on its own isn't going to manage to eradicate TB. It is our most pressing endemic animal health and welfare disease that we have, and attempt to remove the politics from TB policy.
Brilliant. That's super. And my WhatsApp was buzzing away there, but it wasn't what I thought it was. I think we better wrap this up now. We've been on air almost an hour. I just want to thank all of our speakers for this morning, for their time and their input into the session. Hopefully you've all found it interesting. We've covered a lot of ground, but some really clear messages there at the end. I think we've packaged this up and send it through to the DEFRA team so that they get a flavour of what the industry thinks. Thank you also to the RABDF team, so Romney and Carrie in the background popping questions through. Just by way of reminder, we've got the second webinar tomorrow morning, so 10:30, same time, protecting our product, how welfare and labelling go hand in hand. And then on Thursday, the environmental challenges facing the sector and future legislation, both of which should be really interesting sessions. Don't forget, you can access up-to-date news on the RABDF website, so rabdf.co.uk, and also Dairy Tech. We missed last year, of course. We did a virtual Dairy Tech, but we're aiming to have Dairy Tech back in Stoneleigh Park on the 2nd of February next year. So keep that in your diaries. Really looking forward to that and seeing everyone face to face again. It promises to be a great event. I know we're pretty much sold out so far as trade space goes, and tickets are already flying out the door. So really excited about that. Thank you also to Barclays and 4Farmers for sponsoring this. Really useful, and you know, really thankful for them for sponsoring all three events this week. And really great to see you all. We've had a good participation throughout. And again, thank you all for your time this morning, and hopefully we'll see you log on tomorrow morning. So thank you.